Hello, and welcome to the Tradeshift Sanctuary in Davos, Switzerland. I'm Travis Bickham, and Tradeshift has partnered with CNBC to bring a week's worth of programming with some of the world's foremost leaders and thinkers during the World Economic Forum. Here today, I have with me Sarika Garg, SVP of Marketplace at Tradeshift, and Mikkel Hippe Brun, co-founder and SVP of APAC, also at Tradeshift. Today's discussion is going to center largely around marketplaces. What are they? What's the history? What's the future? And where do we see the most benefit for business? So Sarika, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about marketplaces as a concept and also what that means to you?
Sure. So if you think of marketplaces and the history of marketplaces, it really started off with people just meeting and starting to do business face to face. And then it moved to paper. And then it moved to these sort of rigid systems, ERP systems, creating business between buyers and sellers. And I think we've moved into a world which is quite different and maybe haven't quite realized it yet. So the example that I like to give is, if you look at our iPhone, we actually think the iPhone was made by Apple, but it's actually tens of thousands of companies that have come together to build this iPhone. So it's really like an ecosystem that comes together to build the products that we have today. And that's what make good, flexible ecosystems make the competitive product of tomorrow.
I love that. That's such a good example. It brings the concept home. And then for you at Tradeshift, obviously what you're working on is very much related to these concepts.
Yes.
What's the project and what are you really trying to accomplish?
Right, absolutely. So in the last 5 to 6 years at Tradeshift, we've largely focused on helping global buyers to connect with their suppliers so they can do supply chain, finance with their suppliers. And when we think of marketplace, we're actually focusing on the other side of the equation. We're looking at supplier commerce and how can we help suppliers to have a better experience with commerce. So the example I would give is if there's a supplier, how can the supplier have their brand on Tradeshift, right? So that they can actually say who they are, what are their reference customers, what certifications do they have, sustainability, minority. Do they do business with Fortune 500? That's an important thing to establish trust. And what are the products and services? And once they can actually have this whole brand on Tradeshift, they can use it to find new business, conduct that business on Tradeshift through transactions on Tradeshift, and then get access to better finance. And that's another thing that's really, really important because we have all the transactional data, document data. We can actually help these suppliers get better access to low-cost finance, right? And today at Tradeshift, this year we're actually launching the marketplace, and we are working very closely with some of our biggest financial companies in the world to bring this whole concept to life.
And I think something that, Mikkel, go ahead.
Yeah, I think historically you could say that suppliers have been between a rock and a hard place in interacting with the big buyers. They were required to upload a lot of content to these marketplaces. And there was like a bad circle because the buying organization was reluctant to use the catalog and procure from that catalog unless there was enough content. Right. And so, most of these solutions have not been very successful. And I think what we provide in Tradeshift, we provide a network effect. So when the supplier uploads her catalog, it will be available to all the buyers on the Tradeshift platform. So it's an investment that you take once against a lot of big buyers on the marketplace.
Yeah, there's many suppliers that I talk to which talk about how they're actually working with 200 different portals because every buyer will come to them separately and say, hey, can you upload your content here, your catalog? Can you upload your content? It's a nightmare for them to actually manage this and be effective. So that's exactly what you're talking about. So it's really important.
Absolutely.
To look at it from the supplier's perspective. Yeah.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, a business is really made up of two things, right? A brand and a supply chain. So if you're not taking care of the supply chain, it's going to be tough. And then what about the differences between public and private marketplaces?
Right. So we think of marketplaces as public marketplaces. So one is it's open to everybody. Think Amazon, right? Anybody can go there. They can find suppliers. They can they can start, engaging with them, get quotations, start, doing business with them. The other concept is at Tradeshift, which we're looking at, and we're working with some of our largest global companies that we work with, is the concept of private marketplaces. So the private marketplace is something where you as a business can connect to your contracted suppliers who you actually already have a relationship with, and you can have that in one place. But at the same time, you can have pockets from which you can actually connect to public marketplace. So an example I can give you is a company may be moving into the region of, I don't know, South Africa, let's take an example, or China, and they don't have a procurement team there or established supplier base. They can then actually access the private marketplace for suppliers in that region. Another example may be a category, so they may be a category that they are not experts in, and in that way they can actually have access, access to the private marketplace to get access to that category that they're buying, right?
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for the big buyers, it's all about getting spend under management, and there is so much rogue spend happening in large organizations, and with the failure of traditional marketplaces and procurement solutions, the problem simply has not been solved. And I think we actually bring something very valuable to the market with our approach, with a combination of private marketplaces and access to public marketplaces. And we even came up with a model where if someone found a product outside the catalog, they could still go through the whole workflow process of getting it approved, still being under management. So there was visibility into the organization about what's being procured. So we could really approach the ambition of getting 100% spend under management.
So you can actually go outside the catalog to buy.
You can go outside the catalog, but you can still be compliant. You can still have visibility on exactly what your employees are buying. And that way you can actually make better decisions for your company.
That's a pretty strong differentiator. I think another one I'd like to touch on is Tradeshift, of course, is very open and known for its world-class rates of supplier onboarding. I want to hear a little bit about network effects. So I open this up to whoever wants to take it, but why is that so beneficial?
Well, I think as I mentioned before, the suppliers have been struggling with delivering the content to these marketplaces in the past, and to the buying organizations. They didn't really see the benefits. They didn't get the volume they were hoping for. So it's really been a vicious circle. But on Tradeshift, we have so many big buyers that are interested in procuring goods from our network. And what you get on Tradeshift is that you have established relationships that you can show off to the world. So someone will look at you and say, okay, you are a supplier to the NHS. Well, you've been vetted by the NHS. Well, then certainly you can also be a supplier to us. So we establish trust by exposing the relationships we have on the network. So I think that's something that's very valuable to suppliers. And then simply from a cost perspective, just having to maintain one catalog as opposed to maintaining multiple catalogs with different buyers. So that's really the core of a network effect, that you have enough to interact with on a platform. Brings a lot more value.
Right, so I think the NHS example is a good one, and maybe if I can articulate that a little bit more. So NHS has 600 trusts or somewhat like that, something like that. And if one supplier is selling to one hospital, why can we not enable that supplier to sell to the 600 trusts and all the hospitals related to that? And with using the Tradeshift platform, the supplier can actually make their presence, their compliance available, so that that trust is established very easily with all the other trusts. So it's a better way to do business.
Interesting. And then thinking about not just network effects, but this project that you're working on, what's the potential for your customers? What should they expect to see as this gets ramped up?
So we're primarily right now focusing on UK as our first market that we're going in. But we're here at Davos because we felt that there's actually a much, much larger play over here. And that's why I actually invited Mikkel to come talk about that. We think this is actually very significantly big. If we have this sort of approach, we can actually open the world and connect East and West as well in many ways. And I don't know, Mikkel, if you can actually elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so for instance, if we look at China, that's where I spent most of my time. There is a huge domestic market. Consumer market is fabulous. If you take the two biggest consumer marketplaces, Tmall and JD, they have 80% of the online consumer market in China altogether. And there's a huge demand. I think headlines were recently all red with news about the Black Friday or the Singles Day in China and record sales that were significantly higher compared to what we saw even in North America. And another thing we saw just a week ago, we saw Jack Ma standing next to Trump saying, "I want to create 1 million jobs in the U.S." And the way he wants to create 1 million jobs is to take 1 million SMEs in the US and bring them on to sell on the consumer marketplaces in China. And we're in a unique position in Tradeshift to actually make this happen because we have the product information management system that the suppliers need. They can expose their products on the Tradeshift marketplaces, and we can also help them get exposed in China. So you get a single entry to marketplaces in China and elsewhere. And I think that's something that really makes us excited that we can help bring in a lot more business also outside from other sources.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I think having presence in US and Europe and China, we are sort of uniquely positioned to look at how can we actually help facilitate as sort of the center of gravity moves from the west to the east, as the buying power becomes stronger and stronger on the east. How can we actually help connect the west suppliers of the east and the east with the west, right? So that we can actually bring the world a little bit closer together.
Really, really important point, especially this week in Davos. As you both know, President Xi Jinping was here and gave a very well-received speech. And I think that something I want to touch on a little bit here is this concept of the new Silk Road. Mikkel, maybe you can take that and talk about what it means for your business in the context of marketplace.
Yeah. So the One Belt, One Road initiative, as it's also called, is a $140 billion investment into infrastructure, with rail infrastructure, with ports, connecting all of this. It's basically for the rail infrastructure, it starts in Chongqing in China. The old capital with 30 million inhabitants, connecting all the way to Duisburg in Germany. And so these railway wagons will be able to pass unhindered all the way to Europe in just 12 days. So the way I like to see this is like taking a world map, folding it up, putting China right next to Europe. So there's definitely disruption happening in this area. So sea freight will also be under a sharp competition here. So we actually established a joint venture in Chongqing to leverage this whole new infrastructure initiative because the heavy manufacturing industry in China is located in Chongqing with huge supply chains into Europe. And there's a big appetite for big domestic buyers in China to get access to merchants outside China and to really take advantage of this new infrastructure. So, and Xi Jinping was also mentioning this initiative in his speech, really trying to open up China to be more balanced. It's been that China was the manufacturing nation of the world, but things are definitely changing right now.
Right. He also talked about the world needing to become more connected and inclusive, and I think that's actually relates so deeply with kind of what we're doing with marketplaces.
Follow-up question for you, Sarika. Is this One Belt, One Road initiative potentially the physical connectivity that's going to match the digital connectivity that you're trying to provide? Is that really a way we could look at it?
I think physical and digital go hand in hand. Right, when you can bring digital companies digitally together, you can enable then the logistics part of it physically. So I think they actually go hand in hand. Right?
Okay, and we're almost out of time, so I want to finish up with is tying this back in to the theme of WEF this week, which is of course responsive and responsible leadership. Looking at political leaders and business leaders and the vision that you two have elaborated today, what do we really need to be striving for in terms of infrastructure and making progress with software in 2017 to help make this a reality?
I think it's important for us to not only think of dominant players and how we can help them. I think we need to think of the world as bigger and more inclusive of small players and big players, and that's where building, using a marketplace or a network approach is actually the right approach in the world that we're moving towards in 2018 and 2019. And I think that's actually what the message that I would want to convey. Right?
Well put. I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you.
So good, nothing to add. Well, thank you both. This is the Tradeshift Sanctuary in partnership with CNBC in Davos, Switzerland. Thank you.